Hi folks, it's me, Richard James, the socio. As always, bringing you the truth of why the Rockefellers murdered JFK, RFK, and ordered Watergate, just as a few of their heinous crimes against God and man. But I'm standing in front of this house here. You want to know something? This ain't a house. Looks like a house, but it's not. It's a guardhouse. I'm here at what was the mansion of a man named Colonel Oliver Hazard Payne. That name might ring a bell. Hazard Payne, Oliver Hazard. He's related to the famous American. Let's call him an admiral, who defeated the British on Lake Erie. Hazard Perry was his name. Commodore Hazard Perry. They're related. It was actually his uncle. But the reason I came here, I was here in 2013. I was amazed. But Colonel Oliver Hazard Payne was one of John Rockefeller's primary partners. Standard Oil was never a one-man show. There was actually 6 partners. And they originally all traced back to Cleveland, Ohio, which was the birthplace of Standard Oil. Rockefeller was the largest shareholder, but there was other shareholders, and you can see they become very rich. This is just the entrance to the mansion. We're going to go up and see it as much as we can. I've been here before. I did limited photography, but there it is. You see the posts? See, that's the drive up to the mansion. And that's going to pan once more. See, it's owned by the Morris Brothers. It was donated to the Morris Brothers. Now, they have a campus on the other side of the Hudson River. Actually, to give you my geology here, I'm just probably 10 miles north of Poughkeepsie and New Paltz. And this is historic. You hear this traffic going by. We're going to get off this road in a little while. This is the old Route 9A. Well, it ties into Route 9, which goes down into Broadway, which is goes down to Times Square, goes right down to the financial district. But back in the day, this was the preserves of the industrial elite, and most of their former mansions have been turned over to religious organizations, many of them Catholics. But this is what they call Esopus, which is like a township here. And it does connect to the Kennedy assassination in a way, because Colonel Oliver Hazard Perry's sister married William Collins Whitney. All right, his grandson, I connected to JFK. Whitney, John Hay Whitney, who would be the grandson of Collins Whitney, conspired with Nelson Rockefeller to kill JFK. There's evidence I have, circumstantial evidence that connects John Hay Whitney to the JFK assassination. In fact, if you ever remember, a piece of history, when President Kennedy made his famous secret society speech, he called out Jack. Well, that was his nickname, Jack, because he played polo. He was a championship polo player. He called out his newspaper. Jack Whitney owned the Herald Tribune newspaper, which eventually merged with the Washington Post and the New York Times. They set up a third paper. I think it's called the New York Times International. You see Washington Post, Watergate, Woodward and Bernstein, who made up a fake story. Well, tell me about Watergate. Oh, President Nixon resigned. Well, folks, that's not the whole story. Nelson Rockefeller, the Terrible, became vice president, only one step from the White House. That's the whole story of Watergate that people forget. Okay, we're going to move on. I'm going to show you 2 other pieces of property here, maybe 3. We're just off the Hudson River. Over that knoll, you'll see the Hudson River. Okay, see you in a few. Let's do playback. I told you a minute ago that I mentioned Payne, the name Payne. There it is, Payne Estate. You see Marist Brothers and the Mid-Hudson Valley Camp. These things have changed. So this sign was here in 2013. So I don't know how much has changed around here. So far, I haven't seen any no trespassing signs. I'm trying to bring you the truth. You know, sometimes you got to jump a fence or two to get to the truth. But you see the name Payne. Colonel Oliver Hazard Payne was one of the original founders of Standard Oil. And his sister married William Collins Whitney of the famously rich Whitney family, and they owned two banks. They owned the Knickerbocker Bank, which went bankrupt in the panic of 1907, which Rockefeller and J.P. Morgan worked to try to save unsuccessfully. And Collins, and then his, I've connected John Hay Whitney to the Kennedy assassination. And John Hay Whitney, in my book, if you ever read my book, Clash of Dynasties, and John Hay Whitney, President Kennedy called out John Hay Whitney in his secret society speech. Not necessarily the name, but he called out his newspaper, the Herald Tribune, which I said merged with the Washington Post and the New York Times to form, I think it's the New York Times International publication. So you see the connection to Watergate here, where I tell you Nelson Rockefeller ordered Watergate? Because, tell me about Watergate. Well, President Nixon resigned. No, that's not the whole story. Nelson, the terrible Nelson, the murderer that he was one step away from the White House. And if a Squeaky Fromm had done her job and assassinated Gerald Ford, Squeaky Fromm was part of their the Rockefeller MK Ultra experiments. All the assassins, Oswald, Sirhan Sirhan, alleged assassin, and then Squeaky Fromm, who failed to do her job she was commissioned to do by Rockefellers, all were Manchurian candidates, and most of that experimentation and development of the weaponization was developed through the MK Ultra Allen Institute. See, there's a school up here. I believe there's a school, and I'm not absolutely sure, but I think it's owned. But this whole estate one time was owned by the Astor family. See, and I think the original Astor home is a school now. It's like some kind of a day school or something. I'm not really sure. And I was also told by a local historian that the Rockefeller family had a mansion next door, which they demolished. So I did a little research to see keep in mind the Rockefeller family, there's several branches of the family now. There's 300 family members now, so I don't know which branch of the family owned it. I did some very limited research on it. It's not all that important. But then again, it shows the relationship to the Rockefellers. But here it is, the sign Payne. So all this land up here hasn't been deeded over to the Marist family. The Payne family still probably owns some of it. And then again, these are the people, who killed JFK. These are the wealthiest. This whole land up here along the Hudson, I call them the lords and patrons of the Hudson River Valley. They owned America's industries and banks. This is where they had their country homes. We're only here maybe about an hour out of New York City. I'm only guessing, but approximately. And I was there in 2013. So I'm going to seek out two things here, maybe three things. One is the boathouse. I had a conversation with a local historian here. He was quite elderly. I'm sure he's past it now, but he said there was a boathouse. He says, you got to go check out this boathouse. You won't believe it. So I'm going to see if I can get to this boathouse. And then we're going to go to what was the Payne Mansion. And I'm trying to get you the Payne Mansion is on the other side of a wall, but I'm going to see if we can get a view of this. And I think if you look across from the Payne mansion, you look across the Hudson, you can see the Vanderbilt home. See, these are the people that controlled and owned New York City as the financial capital of the world. That's why it all comes, the strings of power that killed JFK all come back to Fifth Avenue, where the Vanderbilts and the Astors and the Roosevelts and these wealthy families and the Whitneys had their mansions. It all comes back here. And these were the country homes. And the Rockefellers are across the river too, Pocantico, but down a little ways, maybe 20 miles. And of course, I go to Sleepy Hollow at Pocantico every time I come to New York City. Okay, let's move on. Hi, folks. I was showing you the front of the Payne estate here. Now I'm basically on the Hudson River here, a beautiful side of the Hudson River. And this is the very edge where the Payne Mansion comes to the Hudson River. If you look at my camera, if you look in the middle of the lens, you'll see this big house on the hill across the river. That's the Vanderbilt Mansion. That was owned by Franklin Vanderbilt, and it's a museum today. Sometime I get a chance, I want to get in and take a tour of that place. But they do connect to the JFK assassination because documents were uncovered that Oswald's best friend, George Morenchid's, there was documents that were found by researcher Bruce Addison that said George was taking orders from one of the Vanderbilts. Maybe it was William Vanderbilt during World War II. He published that in a book. But I'm going to show you a little bit about, I'm going to show you a little more of this water frontage here. See, there's the river. As I said before, this was the area up here, the Hudson River Valley. We're about an hour and a half from New York City. This was the boathouse. When people came here back in 1900, when this was built, they came up by boat. I'm going to back this off a little bit. I would have never found this place without the help of a local historian here. There it is. That's the boathouse. So people would come into this boathouse. There's some beautiful Roman frescoes in there, but it's locked up. I don't think the camera would pick them up. And this was... See, we're only an hour and a half from New York City, so these wealthy titans of industry that control the financial strings of this nation and beyond, this really came up for the weekends. This was their country estates. And I'm going to pan the camera a little more this way, and you'll be able to see this little guardhouse. I'm sorry, it's not. It's a little gazebo. Beautiful view of the Hudson. And well, this is it. This is the region. We're getting a little color here coming in, and we're getting some pretty color here. This is why these people came here. And there's centuries of history. This is the area of Rip Van Winkle. There's centuries of history here. 4 centuries of it. And these industrialists, 1900, maybe 15, 20 years before that. See, there it is. Vanderbilt, Franklin Vanderbilt. Now, Fifth Avenue from 50th Street, which is Rockefeller Center, was called Vanderbilt Row. There is one Astor property in the area. Actually, this estate owned by Payne was originally the Astor estate. And there's another old house on this property. I gotta assume it was owned by the Astors, but Payne built a huge mansion. And of course, Franklin's brother George built the famous, probably the most elaborate home in America, down in North Carolina, Asheville, is it? North Carolina. That was George and Franklin were brothers. And then the other brothers, Cornelius Vanderbilt II built, I believe, the breakers in Newport. And Willie K. built Marble House in Newport. So those are 4 brawlers. There was a 5th brawler too, I think. Yeah, here's what gets interesting. I talk about Cornelius Vanderbilt II. Oswald's best friend, George Morenchides, his office was right across the street at 5th Avenue from what was the mansion of Cornelius Vanderbilt II. It was demolished to build Berghoff Goodman store. It's 57th and 5th. Trump Tower's right there, Tiffany Diamonds, and it's the most richest shopping intersection in the world. And George's office, his hooker was Hooker and de Morenchides. George was partners with that Hooker. That a Hooker dynasty of Hartford, Connecticut married in with the Rockefellers. Blanchett Ferry Hooker married John Rockefeller III. So there's a relationship. But anyways, Cornelius Vanderbilt II, his mansion was on the corner of 57th, which was right across the street from Hooker and de Morenchides, the wealthiest intersection. Today they call it Billionaires Row. So here it is. That was kind of George, a man who was a 5th Avenue, Park Avenue socialite hanging out with Oswald, who was a man of very low financial means. I don't think that was by choice. I think it was by order. It's all part of the plot to kill JFK. But these were the strings of power. They came back to New York City, 5th Avenue, Wall Street, Rockefeller Center, 30 Rockefeller Plaza. And then, like I say, these people vacation. Well, these were their summer homes. And this is the neighborhood. There's a lot of mansions up and through this area, covered by acres and acres of forests. Many of them have been donated to religious organizations and things. But this Vanderbilt is a museum, and maybe I'll try to get in there if I got time. Okay, I'm going to show you the front of the Payne Mansion. You're going to be impressed, folks. These are the people who were the money authorities, the money masters, and they rule over the political authority. They finance, they buy all our public offices, they buy the White House, they buy all the Senate seats, they buy the directorships, they buy the ambassadorships. These are the strings of power lead to, right here where I'm standing. Okay, I'm going to take you up and show you the front of the Payne Mansion. Beautiful. Ta-da! I told you, folks. Richard DeSocio, he doesn't play. I told you this was the estate of Colonel Oliver Hazard Payne. I get it confused with Commodore Oliver Hazard Perry. Well, you know why? They were uncle and nephew. That's why the names sound a bell. Well, I told you, folks, these were the strings of power. These were the titans of industry that controlled our financial district and still do. Oh, they don't occupy these homes anymore. But this was the estate that Mr. Payne, and it connects to the JFK assassination because Payne's sister married William Collins Whitney, whose grandson I connected to JFK assassination. If you read my book, Clash of Dynasty, but when JFK made his famous secret society speech at the Waldorf Astoria, was it 1962, 1961? I can't remember, but that's easily Googleable. He called out John Hay Whitney. And John Hay Whitney, he didn't call him out by name, but he called out his newspaper, the Herald Tribune. Now, the Herald Tribune merged with the Washington Post and New York Times to form the New York Times International. See, I told you about the Rockefellers ordering Watergate. So you got to understand, I mean, the person of record who owned Washington Post, it all ties to Watergate because the person of record who owned the Washington Post was Eugene Meyer, who offices were 30 Rockefeller Plaza, right next to Nelson Rockefeller's office. Actually, he was a managing partner of Lazard, which took over the Rockefeller family office after David died. See what I'm telling you? And his daughter was the boss of the Washington Post at the time of the Watergate cover-up of the truth. The Washington Post covered up the truth because it's run by the Rockefellers. But what I want you to know is all these institutions are run out of Fifth Avenue, Rockefeller Center, Wall Street. These are the strings of power. This is the money and wealth of the nation. The money authority controls the governmental authorities. That's why when you have a political elections, you see hundreds of millions of dollars rolling into political coffers. This is where the money comes from. But William Collins Whitney, I mentioned William Collins Whitney. See, his John Hay Whitney owned the Herald Tribune. Now, the Herald Tribune got mentioned in Warren Commission documents, in connection to another. Well, it's in the news every day now. Mar-a-Lago. They're trying to put a value on Mar-a-Lago, right? Well, Mar-a-Lago was owned by who? Margaret Meriwether Post. Well, she indirectly got mentioned in the Warren Commission documents, document 533, because she was married to Ambassador Davies. See, they mentioned Ambassador Davies in a connection to the Herald Tribune newspaper, and there was a connection there between Ambassador Davies and the Herald Tribune newspaper. See, and Margaret Meriwether's Post was next door neighbor in Palm Beach was Henry Flagler, another one of John Rockefeller's business partners. Flagler was the more famous one. Payne not as famous. And Payne also owned the tobacco with Charles. I'm sorry, not Charles. Oh, so many names I can't remember. But Payne, the Payne family and the Whitney family owned the American Tobacco Trust or Monopoly with Duke. And Duke lived next to Payne Whitney on Fifth Avenue. They were both mansions were butted against each other, and the Sinclair mansion. See, all three of them, Henry Sinclair, Sinclair Oil, and George Morenci said in his Warren Commission document he was working for people connected with Sinclair Oil. Well, that's Henry Sinclair. He lived on the corner there. Forgot the street, 72nd and 5th. And then Payne Whitney lived next door, and then Duke, who owned the tobacco, and Duke Energy and Duke University. They were all neighbors, and they owned America's most biggest and wealthiest corporations. And John Hay Whitney grew up in Payne. Payne Whitney was his father, which the Payne Whitney mansion got bought by the French government. It's part of the consulate. Also mentioned in the Warren Commission documents was, well, it wasn't. I take that back. President Kennedy's mistress, who was murdered in 1964, a week at the time, about time of the release, that was a week before or after, she was shot twice in the head in daylight. Mary Pinchot. She was no stranger to Fifth Avenue either. But Mary Pinchot was an heir. She was heiress many fortunes, including a wallpaper making fortune. Wallpaper heiress. She was JFK's mistress. And her sister was married to the Washington Post, at the time, the publisher of the Washington Post, Ben Bradley, who was a self-confessed CIA operative. And Mary Pinchot met JFK through the Herald Tribune newspaper owned by Jack Whitney. But anyways, getting back here with the colonel here. This was his mansion. He turned it over to the Marist family. The Marist brothers, which have a college directly behind me across the other side of... I'm going to pan the camera when we get a chance. But, and we're right across from the Vanderbilt. Oh, you can't see the Vanderbilt mansion. There's trees now. So this was the neighborhood back in 1900. And these people, I call them the lords and patrons of the Hudson River. They own acres and acres of land. There was a Rockefeller mansion over here to the left that was demolished. And I'm not sure which branch of the family owned it. And then also, all property was owned by the Assas at one time. They didn't build that house. They have a house here. I don't think I'm going to bother showing it to you. But it's here. What else can I tell you about Oliver Payne? I mentioned the flag. I mentioned Mar-a-Lago, right? Margaret Meriwether Post. Well, her husband got mentioned in the Warren Commission document, Ambassador Davies. See, the money authority controlled all the offices in Washington. They bought the White House, they bought the Senate, they bought the Congress, they bought the directorships, they bought the ambassadorships. And Mary Margaret, Mary Margaret? I'm stumbling here. My voice is kind of cracked. But Post was her last name. Showing Post cereal. Margaret Meriwether Post, right? Well, her next door neighbor was Henry Flagler. It was the big partners: Flagler, Payne. There was Harkness. He was a silent partner, and actually, Harkness was related to Flagler. They were brother-in-laws. I'm sorry, stepbrothers. Yeah, it's a magnificent day here for photography too. Very beautiful here. I mentioned earlier about the Vanderbilts' connection to Oswald's best friend. The reason I say the Vanderbilts because they're right on the other side of the river. I'm going to pan the camera here so you can see the other side of the river. We're a little higher here. There's the Hudson. And now the Vanderbilt mansion is right over there, but you can't see it because it's black. I showed it to you earlier. I might take another shot at the Vanderbilt mansion with more sun out here. This was the neighborhood, folks. These were the titans of industry that controlled our money and controlled our government. Give you one last look at this mansion. I don't know what I haven't said or should say, or I have to be honest, I had a local historian show me some of this stuff. I would have never found it. I'm going to see if I can get inside. Do a tour inside. Look at that terrace up there. Look at the size of that terrace. Look at the size of that. Look at those big urns. See, look at that size of that. That's really magnificent. I've actually been up there. I was up there in 2013, but I didn't have this high quality camera with me. Okay, let's see what else I can show you. Okay, it's a little better here. The sun is out. I'm on a higher piece of ground here. And if you look right across the Hudson, you can see the Vanderbilt mansion. This was the neighborhood back in 1900. These were the country estates of America's industrial elite. This is like the Great Gatsby on the Hudson. Now, I mentioned Vanderbilt. Now, Franklin, two of his brothers, Cornelius II, built breakers in Newport, and Willie K. built with his wife, Alva, or Ava. Maybe it was Ava Vanderbilt. They built the Marble House, which are all museums now in Newport. And I just want to show you the perspective here. Now, the Vanderbilts, I mentioned their connection to the JFK assassination because George's best friend, Oswald's best friend, George Morenchid's, there was a document that claims that the Vanderbilts he was working for the Vanderbilts in some kind of intelligence operation. He was taking orders from the Vanderbilts during World War II. That document got published in a book called The George Morenchid Story, written by Bruce Addison, who was a sterling researcher. But I'm going to pan the camera here. This was the neighborhood. Okay, that's the Vanderbilt mansion. See, pan the camera. Oh, I got branches in the way. But I just want to give you a perspective. See, there's the Payne mansion. You see, these are people who are next door neighbors, just about. Okay, I'm just going to end this here. I'm just going to give you an end here, show you the Hudson River once more. And okay, there it is. Right across the street is the Vanderbilt mansion, right across the river. That's a museum now, William Henry Vanderbilt. Now, some of you people might be familiar with CNN, the CNN guy. Oh, I hope I can get his name now. Well, he's actually the great grandson of Cornelius Vanderbilt II. See, Franklin built that house over there, and Cornelius Vanderbilt built. There are 5 brothers. built the big breakers in Newport, and Willie K built Marble House in Newport, and George built the big home. It's probably the most magnificent home in America, in the Biltmore in North Carolina, Asheville, North Carolina, which is, I think, still run by family members. And so some of these big mansions up here, some of these historic properties are run by the Rockefellers through their historic Hudson Valley Foundation, whatever you want to call it. I think there are 7 or 8 pieces up here, including a lot of the old property around Pocantico, Sleepy Hollow, like the old mill is part of the Rockefeller Historic Estates. A lot of history here, 4 centuries of history up here. Actually, the Vanderbilt Mansion is recent history. It only goes back to 1900, circa 1900. But these are the people who control our financial world, the titans of industry now here. I want to pan the camera here. This is it. Here's it. We're going to just go up this little grass slope here. There it is. The home of Standard Oil co-founder Payne, Colonel Oliver Hazard Payne, whose sister married into the Whitney dynasty, who were part of the Whitneys owned the Guaranteed Bank, and they owned the bank of the Knickerbocker Bank, which collapsed in 1907, but the Guaranteed Bank merged with House of Morgan, but they're all merged now with the Rockefeller Chase Bank recently, including the Bank in New York. That's why they call it J.P. Morgan Chase. Actually, it was J.P. Morgan Guaranteed. Now, the Roosevelt had 2 banks, and they also merged in with the Chase. This Chemical Bank merged in with the Chase. And the other bank the Roosevelts own, right now it slips me. Oh, the Bank of New York. The Bank of New York was owned by the Roosevelts. Chemical Bank was owned by the Roosevelts, and they've all recently merged in with the Chase. Of course, the Bank of New York ran into financial difficulty because they backed Enron. That's how crooked these people are. Of course, Enron that was a debacle. So the Roosevelt Bank, the Bank of New York, the oldest bank in America, moved in with the Rockefeller. So once was apart is now back together. Hi, folks. I wanted to show you this piece of property here. And I believe this property was owned by the Astors. This whole estate up here one time was owned by the Astor family. And I believe this house was built, I was told it was built as a hunting lodge way back, probably 1880s, 1890s. This was the first building built on this property. And then, of course, Payne, Colonel King came and bought the whole piece and built a massive mansion. But the Astors tie well to JFK assassination because they have the Roosevelt Astor spy ring, and Nelson Rockefeller's uncle Eldridge, who was president of the Chase Bank, he was very involved in that. Joe Persico wrote a book about it. Joe Persico was Nelson Rockefeller's speechwriter. There's a lot of history there. And of course, the Roosevelts and the Astors were super and married more than several times. But Vincent Astor was one of the big stockholders in Newsweek. And Newsweek was merged in with the Washington Post. You see what I keep telling you about America's power, how all these publications and news outlets are all being controlled out of Fifth Avenue and Rockefeller Center. Those are the secret control, the secret strings of power. See, and Vincent Astor owned, he was the biggest stockholder in Newsweek. And who worked for Newsweek? Ben Bradley, who came over to the Washington Post, and they covered up the truth about Watergate. They blamed it on Richard Nixon. They blamed it on President Nixon. It was all Nelson Rockefeller's doing. Because what happened with Watergate, Yeah, Richard Nixon resigned. The president resigned, but Nelson Rockefeller got appointed to the vice presidency. He was not elected. He was appointed. He was appointed by Gerald Ford, who also was appointed. And he was appointed by President Nixon, who in 1963, when Nelson was plotting to kill JFK, he was living in Nelson's penthouse at 810 Fifth Avenue. So you had a president, vice president, not elected. So Nelson Rockefeller was one step. So Watergate put springboard Nelson Rockefeller to the vice presidency. So there, you see what I'm saying? See the pattern of truth what I'm telling you here? And Gerald Ford, President Ford, was on the Warren Commission cover-up, along with the Dulleses, who ran the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. See, Carnegie, Ford, Rockefeller killed Kennedy. They left their money to protect their seed. Their foundation money was used to empower their families to rule America as we speak. So anybody who's a threat to them, like the Kennedys that become, I'll read my book, Clash of Dynasty. I could go on and on and on. Yeah, but Vincent Astor was one of the biggest stockholders in Newsweek. And he originally had a publication called Today Magazine, which had operated on Fifth Avenue. It came out of the Astor Hotel, which was right across the street from Nelson Rockefeller's office on 55th Street. The building has been since demolished. The Astor Hotel is still there. But Nelson Rockefeller's private office, ground floor office on 55th Street was demolished. I was there in 2013. It was there in 2013, but they've since demolished it. Rockefellers are demolishing a lot of buildings. They're doing a lot of reconstruction around Rockefeller Center. So you had Vincent Astor, you had Mellon family, Andrew Mellon is another connection to Newsweek, but I'm not going to go into it now because the Mellon Foundation, it goes back to the Warren Commission documents. It's actually all going to come out in my new book. But the Mellon Foundation is, it's about a block from where Nelson Rockefeller lived. I'll leave it at that. And then it was also Harriman. Averill Harriman there was four owners. Averill Harriman and the other owner was Averill Harriman. Astor was the biggest. See, all those shares went into the Vincent Astor Foundation, which was run by who? Well, the titular head was Brooke Astor, his widow, but the true boss was David Rockefeller. David Rockefeller ran the Astor Foundation, and all those shares for the Washington Post and the New York Times. I mean, the Newsweek was stored there. And it was all held in the Vincent Astor Foundation, so they had all the voting rights. So the Rockefellers were running the Washington Post to their advantage. They had a network of foundation. They had a network of newspapers that they controlled in secrecy through various front individuals. See, all the power, all the strings go back to Fifth Avenue, Wall Street, Rockefeller Center. This was their country homes. These were their hunting resorts and stuff. That's what this was in 1880. This was a super wilderness. You don't get here by boat. Okay, then. This has been a good tour here. A lot of history. You know, I mentioned, too, about Mar-a-Lago owned by Trump, which is in the news now, and I mentioned Margaret Meriwether Post, whose husband got mentioned in the Warren Commission in connection with the Herald Tribune, which was owned by Jack Whitney, who I connected to the Warren Commission, who I connected to the JFK assassination, reading my book, Clash of Dynasties. But also, I mean, Henry Flagler built up Palm Beach, but his co-partner in building up Palm Beach was a man named John MacArthur. No relation to the general, but name spelled the same. His son, Roderick MacArthur, was associating in Mexico with George Marinci, Oswald's best friend. And MacArthur claimed to be a stringer for the Associated Press, which is owned by the Rockefeller. It was headquartered at 50 Rockefeller Plaza. 50 Rockefeller Plaza. So it all ties back. But it was those two men that built up Palm Beach. Henry Flagler, who was Rockefeller's partner, and John MacArthur. Roderick MacArthur was heir to one of America's biggest fortunes. And they made the news. He got into a fight with Nelson Rockefeller over control of the foundation This happened maybe 10 years after. The MacArthur Foundation is run out of Pocatico, the Coach Barn, the Rockefeller Pocatico Estate. They use the Coach Barn, the biggest that's the cabal. That's where the cabal meets. They control the world's biggest foundations. And those foundations have voter rights. Those shares of millions and millions of corporate shares, we all have voter rights. Common shares, they have voter rights. So that's how they control a corporation right out of, you wouldn't believe it, it's controlled right out of the Coach Barn and back in the Rockefeller Cut Mansion. This is where the strings of power come, folks. Okay. See you again shortly.